and of all his velocity, activated all free city orbit, all praise, all the Chinese tablet, and draft takes.
This child doesn't belong here. Children like her don't fly first class. The words rang to the cabin of Flight 447 like the strike of a gavel, and at the center of the storm stood Vivian Ashworth, a woman in her mid-50s with an air of entitlement that seemed as innate as the wrinkles on her face. She pointed down at 9-year-old Zara Montgomery, a young black girl who sat quietly in seat 2A, her small frame gripping a worn stuffed elephant as tears rolled silently down her cheeks. Vivian's voice was sharp, slicing to the murmur of passengers like a knife. "She's clearly in the wrong section," she declared, her tone laced with venomous pride, the kind of prejudice that makes your blood boil and your fists clench without warning. People like that family can't afford these seats. There's obviously been some kind of mistake or fraud. Zara, meanwhile, did nothing provoke her. No loud cries, no disruption, just the quiet dignity of a child bewildered by cruelty, trying to make sense of why someone would single her out for reasons she couldn't possibly understand. The flight attendant, Sarah Chen, knelt beside her, speaking softly, her hands lightly touching Zara's trembling shoulders as if to anchor her to some semblance of safety, while Vivian's accusations grew more venomous with every passing second. "I don't feel safe with her type on this plane," Vivian proclaimed loudly enough that heads turned and phones were pulled out of pockets, some passengers already recording, others frozen in the paralysis of discomfort. You never know with these kids from that background. She's probably dangerous. Airport security was summoned, not by the airline staff, but at Vivian's insistence, and the irony that she convinced them that an innocent child was a threat was lost entirely on her. Vivian had no idea who she was truly challenging, that the world she thought she ruled with her money and status was about to collapse in less than 5 minutes, a phone call away from shattering her sense of invincibility. But to truly understand the gravity of what was about to unfold, we need to rewind back to a luminous morning in Chicago's most exclusive neighborhood, where the morning sun gleamed off the sprawling estate in Lincoln Park, reflecting across manicured gardens and floor-to-ceiling windows an opulent home where 9-year-old Zara Montgomery sat at a marble breakfast table, her legs swinging with anticipation as she enjoyed pancakes with her mother, Victoria Montgomery, a woman whose very presence spoke of power, control, and influence, yet whose love for her daughter tempered that authority with warmth and wisdom. Zara announced with a spark of determination, "Mommy, I want to fly to Daddy's by myself. I'm big enough now." Victoria, ever the master composure, paused mid-scroll on her tablet, where she managed reports from Montgomery Aviation, one of the largest airline companies in America. Her eyes betrayed a flicker of internal conflict, the tension between wanting to protect her child from a world she knew could be harsh and wanting to instill in her the courage to navigate it independently. She hesitated before replying, "Sweetheart, you know how I feel about you traveling alone." But a firmness in her voice softened with love, and Zara, undeterred, countered with the argument only a 9-year-old with fierce determination could make. "But you always say I should be independent and prove I can handle things myself." There was something in that moment, something delicate yet resolute in Zara's gaze, that melted Victoria's protective instincts, and after a contemplative pause, she nodded. "All right, but we do this my way. No special treatment. No announcements about who you are. You travel like any other passenger." Victoria had always kept Zara's identity private, despite their fortune and influence, because she wanted her daughter to experience life unshielded by privilege, to learn that character outweighed status, that dignity could withstand the harshest scrutiny, and that independence was the most valuable lesson a child could learn. Zara practically bounced in her seat with excitement. The thrill of responsibility and adventure coursing through her veins, a joy untainted by the weight of her family's empire. On the day of the flight, Zara dressed herself carefully, a simple outfit that belied her lineage, a pastel dress with modest sneakers, her hair tied neatly, her small backpack packed with few essentials, including her cherished stuffed elephant, a gift from her late grandmother who had always told her, "Courage is quiet, Zara. It doesn't roar, it survives." She stepped into the sleek black car that waited to take her to O'Hare International Airport, her mother watching from the driveway, the image of love and resolve etched into the final moments before independence. The airport was bustling, travelers shuffling with luggage, the scent of coffee and duty-free perfume mingling in the air. But Zara navigated with confidence far beyond her years, her small hands gripping her boarding pass like a talisman, her eyes wide with curiosity and wonder. Boarding the aircraft, she found her seat in first class, 2A, a window seat with a view that made her heart flutter with excitement. And she settled in, adjusting her stuffed elephant in her lap, blissfully unaware of the storm that would soon descend. Vivian Ashworth had boarded shortly after, a woman whose life had been meticulously curated to insulate her from anything or anyone she deemed inferior, and the sight of Zara in that first-class seat ignited a fury rooted in entitlement, prejudice, and insecurity. Her accusations began as whispers, escalating rapidly into venomous declarations that ricocheted across the cabin, ensnaring passengers in discomfort, fear, and disbelief. The flight attendant, Sarah Chen, tried to mediate, kneeling beside Zara, her calm and measured voice attempting to anchor the situation, but Vivian's vitriol escalated, demanding the child be removed, insisting airport security be called, conjuring images of danger that existed only in her imagination. Other passengers recorded the incident, some in horror, some in passive silence, as the absurdity of Vivian's actions collided with reality. Yet, the most dramatic turn was yet to come. In less than 5 minutes, a simple phone call from Zara Montgomery would unravel Vivian's carefully constructed world. Victoria, aware of her daughter's schedule, of Vivian's boarding, of the potential for disruption, called the airline's executive office, her voice firm, authoritative, impossible to ignore. Within moments, the call traced Vivian's personal information, revealing that the woman who thought herself untouchable had misjudged not just a child, but the entire hierarchy of influence she was stepping into. The revelation struck Vivian like a lightning bolt, a data-driven, irrefutable reminder that her assumptions had blinded her to reality, and as the announcement from the airline executive reverberated through the cabin, Vivian's composure crumbled. She had accused an innocent child of fraud, danger, and impropriety, only to discover that she herself was the one exposed, her reputation, her social standing, and her moral credibility shattered in a matter of moments, leaving the passengers, many of whom had filmed the encounter, as witnesses to the public unmasking of entitlement and prejudice. Meanwhile, Zara sat quietly, her small hands still clutching her stuffed elephant, her tears now drying as a sense of vindication replaced confusion, her mother's foresight and planning turning a potentially traumatic encounter into a powerful lesson about justice, resilience, and the unforeseen consequences of arrogance. The flight, which had begun as an ordinary journey from Chicago to another city, transformed into a microcosm of societal dynamics, privilege, and the capacity of individuals to wield influence responsibly or recklessly. By the time the aircraft reached cruising altitude, Vivian Ashworth was pale, trembling, her words exhausted, her outrage impotent, while Zara, a young girl of immense courage and quiet dignity, gazed out the window at the clouds below, understanding, even at 9 years old, that bravery is not always loud, that integrity can protect and guide, and that those who act with malice often find the universe poised to deliver lessons they least expect. The rest of the flight passed in a hushed reverence, the murmurs of passengers shifting from gossip to admiration for the child who had endured an ordeal no 9-year-old should face, and emerged unbroken. The flight attendant offering gentle smiles and reassurance, and Victoria, watching from her control center miles away, confident that her child had gained a new understanding of strength, independence, and dignity. When the plane finally landed, Vivian Ashworth was met with reporters, security officers, and social media backlash, her name trending almost instantly, the digital world amplifying humiliation that had begun with a baseless accusation, while Zara Montgomery stepped off the plane, a figure of quiet triumph, her mother by her side. Both aware that the event would become a story of justice and courage retold in countless variations, a reminder that integrity, foresight, and calm resolve are often the most potent weapons against ignorance, entitlement, and prejudice. In the days that followed, Vivian Ashworth faced consequences from every conceivable angle, her social networks inundated with exposure, her professional relationships strained, her reputation irreparably tarnished, while the story of Zara Montgomery circulated as an emblem of innocence, courage, and the power of a parent to both protect and empower. The incident sparked discussions across social media platforms, news outlets, and community forums about racism, privilege, the responsibilities of those in positions of power, and the moral imperative to act with empathy and justice, the narrative cementing itself as a cautionary tale and a beacon of hope, proving that even a single act of cruelty can be countered with planning, courage, and moral clarity, and that sometimes the smallest voices, if guided wisely, can resonate the loudest and most profoundly. From that moment forward, Zara Montgomery's name became synonymous not just with resilience, but with the quiet, unwavering strength of a child taught well, a young girl who had flown alone, faced adversity, and emerged not only unbroken but triumphant, carrying with her the knowledge that justice, when coupled with courage and wisdom, can transform even the most humiliating and unjust encounters into lessons that ripple far beyond the confines of a single aircraft cabin, reaching into the hearts of all who witness the triumph of character over prejudice, proving that true power lies not in wealth, entitlement, or aggression, but in the steadfast commitment to do what is right, protect the innocent, and allow dignity and truth to prevail over ignorance, fear, and hate. And as the sun set over Chicago that evening, the city bathed in the golden glow of victory for a small, brave girl, one could not help but marvel at the justice that had been so decisively and so beautifully served. This trip to see her father in Los Angeles wasn't just a visit. It was Zara Montgomery's chance to prove to herself and her mother that she was growing up, to show that she could navigate the world on her own terms, that she could handle the responsibilities and uncertainties that came with independence. While she dreamed of her adventure, sitting in the sprawling mansion in Lincoln Park, her mind alight with excitement, another woman in a vastly different Chicago neighborhood was experiencing a morning that could not have been more different. Vivian Ashworth awoke in a cramped studio apartment where the walls seemed to be pressing in from every angle, the ceiling low, the light muted, the atmosphere heavy with the weight of her failing life. The room was littered with bills, overdue notices, and reminders of past failures, a tangled pile of credit card statements showing balances she couldn't hope to repay, eviction notices prominently displayed on the kitchen counter, and past due utility bills scattered like confetti on a stage of despair. At 52, Vivian's life was unraveling faster than she could control, a culmination of failed businesses, broken relationships, and choices that had led her to the precipice of financial ruin. Despite the fear coiling in her stomach, she knew this trip could be her last chance. With shaking hands, she fished out her only remaining credit card, the final card not maxed out, and booked a first-class ticket to Los Angeles, the money disappearing instantly, an act both desperate and reckless, an investment she could scarcely afford but felt she needed to survive in the image she had built for herself. Appearance, to Vivian, had always been everything. Success, power, influence. These were not just goals. They were marks of her value, the only currency she understood. As she stared into her cracked bathroom mirror, brushing a stringy mass of dyed hair into place, she muttered to herself in a voice so low it seemed almost to echo in a confined room. People need to know their place in society. It was not a passing thought. It was a credo, a deeply ingrained worldview she had internalized over decades, reinforced by every setback, every perceived slight, every sense of inadequacy projected onto others. To Vivian, life had a hierarchy, and some people simply did not belong in spaces she deemed reserved for the successful, the wealthy, and the powerful. People who, in her mind, looked like her. Black families, immigrants, those she labeled as underprivileged. These were the people who, in her imagination, were intruders in a world she believed she owned by right. Meanwhile, at Chicago O'Hare Airport, another character prepared to play her part in the unfolding drama. Jennifer Walsh, a gate agent who had worked the same counter for 8 years, had developed her own biases, her own narrow sense of who deserved what treatment. When well-dressed white families approached, her face lit up, warm smiles and helpful gestures flowing effortlessly. But when passengers who didn't fit her assumptions arrived, her demeanor shifted sharply, her patience thinning, her judgment harsh and immediate. It was a kind of small, invisible racism that worked like a filter, separating those she thought belonged from those she didn't, an invisible yet palpable power she wielded unconsciously. On that day, Flight 447's crew was blissfully unaware of the storm about to descend upon them. Flight attendant Sarah Chen, professional and compassionate, and Captain James Rodriguez, diligent and steady, believed in fairness and proper protocol, never imagining that a quiet child in seat 2A was the daughter of the woman who ultimately controlled their careers, a little girl whose presence would instantly expose every prejudiced assumption around her. Zara, meanwhile, had been waved through security with no fanfare, her boarding pass scanned, her small backpack slung carefully over her shoulder, her heart racing with excitement as she passed through the bustling airport. She had been trained by her mother to be discreet, to appear as a normal passenger, yet every step she took was infused with the thrill of independence. She smiled politely at strangers, adjusted her stuffed elephant, and kept her posture straight, not as a statement of entitlement, but as a reflection of the confidence instilled in her by Zara Montgomery, who had always emphasized dignity and composure as tools of strength. Vivian Ashworth, having arrived at O'Hare in her borrowed or rented luxury-style vehicle, entered the airport with the air of someone who expected recognition, a person accustomed to authority and accustomed to being treated as important, even when her reality was a stark contrast. She wore a designer knockoff outfit, expensive-looking accessories that she had scraped together, makeup carefully applied to project a veneer of success she no longer truly possessed. Her mind, however, was in turmoil. Her upcoming meeting in Los Angeles was critical. If it went poorly, she had no fallback. This wasn't just business. It was survival, or so she believed. As she approached the gate for Flight 447, she saw a crowd of passengers, their faces and postures triggering instant, unfiltered judgments in her mind. Her eyes, scanning for perceived improprieties, landed on the child who would soon become the target of her irrational outrage. Zara Montgomery, unaware of Vivian's scrutiny, had already made her way to seat 2A in first class, adjusting her small bag and clutching her elephant, the wide-eyed innocence of a child mixed with the steely composure instilled by her mother. Vivian's mind immediately erupted with assumptions, prejudices crystallizing into anger and a sense of moral superiority. She approached, voice sharp and commanding. This child doesn't belong here. Children like her don't fly first class. The words cut through the cabin, jarring the other passengers, forcing heads to turn, phones to be raised. Zara looked up, confused, her small lips parting in silent protest, her heart hammering in her chest as she tried to understand why a stranger was addressing her in such a cruel, accusatory tone. "She's clearly in the wrong section," Vivian continued, each word dripping with contempt. "People like that family can't afford these seats. There's obviously been some kind of mistake or fraud." Flight attendant Sarah Chen stepped forward, trying to mediate, kneeling beside Zara and speaking softly, a calm presence amidst Vivian's escalating fury. "Ma'am, please," Sarah began gently. "The child is in her assigned seat. There is no mistake." But Vivian's prejudice had already taken control. "I don't feel safe with her type on this plane," she declared, her voice carrying across the cabin. "You never know with these kids from that background. She's probably dangerous." Passengers began to murmur, some pulling out phones, recording the unfolding scene. Others frozen in discomfort, unsure how to react. Vivian called airport security herself, insisting that the child be removed, weaving a narrative of danger from thin air, oblivious of the fact that the girl she accused of fraud and threat was the daughter of the most powerful woman in American aviation. Meanwhile, Victoria Montgomery, back in Chicago but tracking her daughter's journey through a proprietary aviation monitoring system, noticed the anomaly almost immediately. Within minutes, she placed a phone call that would irrevocably alter the course of Vivian's day, her calm but commanding voice setting into motion the unraveling of Vivian Ashworth's false sense of superiority. As security approached the child, the flight crew attempted to maintain order, Sarah Chen discreetly holding Zara's hand, whispering reassurances, the little girl's tears drying as she sensed a subtle shift in the air, the invisible hand of justice about to descend. Vivian, still oblivious, continued to rant, unaware that the phone call to her own bank and personal references would soon reveal her complete lack of credibility, her identity, her financial instability, and the fact that her accusations had no basis. The announcement from the airline executive, orchestrated by Victoria, reverberated to the cabin, exposing Vivian to every passenger, each word a nail in the coffin of her entitlement. Her face, once sharp with self-assurance, now drained of color, reflected the shock of being held accountable, her social and moral failings laid bare in real time, captured by smartphones and transmitted across social media almost instantly. The public shaming was swift and absolute, Vivian's reputation crumbling, while Zara, guided by her mother's foresight, remained composed, her quiet courage shining in stark contrast to the venomous display of prejudice she had endured. Flight 447 became more than a flight. It became a microcosm of society's injustices and the potential for justice to prevail when intelligence, planning, and moral courage intersect. The story spread rapidly, social media platforms erupting with discussions on racism, privilege, entitlement, and the power of accountability, each retelling reinforcing the lesson that arrogance and prejudice carry consequences, especially when confronted by wisdom, authority, and character. Zara stepped off the plane at LAX, small but unbroken, her elephant tucked into her backpack, her mother meeting her with a hug, proud of the grace and resilience her daughter had displayed. Vivian Ashworth, meanwhile, was confronted by airport security, reporters, and social media storms, her world unraveling in a way that exposed not just her financial desperation, but the deep-seated prejudices that had guided her actions. The incident was dissected in news segments, blogs, and online forums, becoming a case study in entitlement, systemic bias, and the unassailable power of moral authority. Zara's journey, intended as a simple visit to her father, had transformed into a lesson in courage, integrity, and the inevitability of justice when malice meets preparation and principle. By the time the sun set over Los Angeles, the narrative of Flight 447 and the confrontation in first class had cemented itself in the public consciousness, a story not only of a child's bravery, but of the consequences that come to those who act without regard for fairness, humanity, or decency, a reminder that even in the most ordinary spaces, the extraordinary power of truth and justice can emerge in ways both dramatic and transformative. Vivian Ashworth will forever be remembered not for business acumen or influence, but for her blind arrogance in the swift, public reckoning that proves some battles cannot be won with prejudice alone. Meanwhile, Zara Montgomery, a young girl of 9, had learned a lesson in independence, resilience, and a quiet power of integrity that no injustice could diminish. Her story a beacon for all who witnessed it, a testament to the fact that courage, preparation, and moral clarity are the greatest offenses against the cruelty of entitlement, bias, and unchecked assumptions, and that the world, while often harsh, has a capacity to right itself when those with power choose to act wisely, compassionately, and decisively, proving once and for all that justice, even for a child flying alone, is never out of reach when guided by truth and principle, and that those who wield prejudice as a weapon will ultimately face the consequences of their own making, leaving the innocent prepared and courageous to rise above and thrive. The moment Jennifer Walsh saw the two blond-haired, blue-eyed children walking toward her gate counter with their little rolling suitcases, her entire demeanor shifted in an instant, as if a switch had been flipped from neutral to sheer delight, a transformation so stark that anyone watching might have thought they were witnessing magic rather than mere bias. "Oh my goodness, how exciting!" she exclaimed, clapping her hands together like a person whose entire world had just brightened with the sight of these two young girls, Emma and Sophie, aged 8 and 10, both unaccompanied minors on their journey to visit their grandmother in Los Angeles. "Are you two flying all by yourselves today? What big girls you are." Her voice, sugary, sweet, and warm, radiated genuine charm, the kind of tone adults reserve for children they find enchanting. Jennifer stepped out from behind the counter, kneeling so that her eyes were level with theirs, a gesture of attention and care, almost theatrical in its display of warmth. "Let me get you some special treats for the flight," she said, reaching into a drawer behind her that seemed to hold an endless supply of goodies, coloring books, crayons, extra snacks, and began distributing them with exaggerated delight, as though each item were a treasure specifically meant for these children. She went further. "And you know what? I'm going to make sure you get to board first so you can pick the best seats," she said, her eyes sparkling with performative generosity that she clearly reserved for those she deemed worthy. Then, with the authoritative confidence of someone who believed she was a master of ceremonies, Jennifer took the microphone and made an announcement over the gate's intercom system. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have some very special young travelers with us today. Everyone give a wave to Emma and Sophie, who are being so brave flying by themselves." The passengers waiting in the terminal smiled warmly, some even applauding, creating a small bubble of admiration and attention around the two girls, reinforcing Jennifer's own sense of accomplishment in curating the moment. Jennifer personally escorted Emma and Sophie to specially designated seating near the gate, chatting animatedly about their trip, their schools, their favorite cartoons, and their excitement about visiting Los Angeles. She brought them juice boxes, snacks, and encouraged them to explore the play area nearby, all the while continuing to praise their politeness, their charm, and the excellence of their upbringing. "You girls are so well-behaved and polite," she gushed, her tone unreserved, almost reverent. Your parents raised you right. I just know you're going to have the most wonderful flight. For 20 minutes, the two white children received what could only be described as pampered royal treatment, a full spectrum of attention, validation, and care that would make any parent beam with pride. Jennifer checked on them repeatedly, called the flight crew to announce the darling little passengers she was escorting, and ensured that every detail of their journey felt celebratory. And then the scene shifted, the bubble of privilege and favor breaking with the arrival of another child, one who would immediately expose the harsh, unspoken inequities at play. 9-year-old Zara Montgomery approached the same gate counter, walking with quiet confidence, her small backpack firmly in place, her hands carrying the requisite unaccompanied minor paperwork, all meticulously prepared and legitimate. She radiated excitement about her journey, her first solo flight, yet also the poised composure instilled in her by her mother, Victoria Montgomery, one of the most powerful figures in the airline industry. But the moment Jennifer Walsh looked up and saw this young black girl standing at her counter, everything changed. The warmth, the sugar-coated delight she had shown Emma and Sophie evaporated as if it had never existed. Her posture stiffened, her facial muscles tensing into an expression of suspicion and cold professionalism, her eyes narrowing imperceptibly but unmistakably, the subconscious shift betraying a deep-seated bias she was likely unaware of in the moment, but that would dictate every interaction. "Can I help you?" Jennifer asked in a flat, clipped tone, almost attached, refusing to meet Zara's eyes, a stark contrast to the warmth she had lavished on the previous children. Zara, still riding the thrill of independence and excitement for the journey ahead, smiled brightly, handing over her documentation. "Hi, I'm flying to Los Angeles to see my daddy," she said, her voice polite, confident, and cheerful. Jennifer took the papers, her hands trembling slightly, not with nervousness, but with a calculated scrutiny, a lens that filtered the world through assumptions of race, wealth, and social status. When she saw the first-class designation on Zara's boarding pass, her suspicion intensified, her eyes narrowed, her lips pursed, and she held the boarding pass up to the light, examining it as if it were counterfeit currency, as though the idea that a black child could legitimately hold a first-class ticket were inconceivable. "This is first class," she said slowly, each syllable weighed with doubt and incredulity. "Are you sure this is correct? These tickets are very expensive." Zara's smile faltered slightly, confusion knitting her brows. She could sense that something was wrong, but at 9 years old, she lacked the context and vocabulary to understand why a grown woman was treating her with suspicion and contempt. "Yes, ma'am. My mommy bought it for me," she replied politely. Jennifer's expression darkened further, suspicion turning into condescension. "Maybe you should double-check with your parents about where you're supposed to sit. Sometimes there are mix-ups with these computer systems," she suggested, loudly enough that other passengers could hear, and unnecessary, insulting public interrogation aimed at a child whose only crime was existing outside of Jennifer's narrow worldview. It was a stark juxtaposition. The two white girls had been celebrated, treated with indulgence and trust, their paperwork never questioned, their documentation never examined under a microscope. Yet here was Zara, a child of color with perfectly legitimate documents, being treated as a potential fraud simply because she did not fit the preconceived mold Jennifer had constructed in her mind. The inequity was glaring, the injustice palpable, as Jennifer proceeded to escalate the situation. "I need to verify this," she announced, deliberately loud, ensuring that surrounding passengers were aware, that the scrutiny itself became a form of social punishment, an assertion of bias cloaked in procedural necessity. Zara stood still, her hands gripping her stuffed elephant tucked into her backpack, her heart thudding as she tried to understand why the excitement and pride she had felt moments ago were now replaced by tension and judgment. She could feel eyes on her, some curious, some disapproving, some silently recording, yet she remained composed, a quiet strength evident even in her small frame. The contrast between treatment of children based on race was stark, almost theatrical, as Jennifer pulled out a phone to call supervisors, citing the need to verify, insinuating a level of incompetence or fraud on Zara's part. While Em and Sophie had not been subjected to any similar scrutiny, their innocence and legitimacy assumed without question. The injustice was compounded by the fact that Jennifer's actions were performative. She was aware of the theater, the social display, the subtle assertion of dominance and control over who belongs and who does not. Each question, each delay, each suspicious glance carried unspoken messages about worth, entitlement, and the social hierarchy she perceived. Meanwhile, passengers began murmuring, some sensing the unfairness of the encounter, others unsure how to intervene, the air thick with tension, the terminal buzzing with a mixture of curiosity, discomfort, and anticipation for the inevitable resolution. Sarah Chen, the flight attendant assigned to Flight 447, was alerted to the unusual delay at the gate, her professionalism prompting her to approach cautiously, aware that any misstep could escalate the situation further. Zara's mother, Zara Montgomery, monitoring the flight via her proprietary systems, noticed the anomaly immediately, sensing that her carefully orchestrated plan for a normal experience for her daughter was being undermined by the prejudices of an uninformed gate agent. Within moments, Victoria took decisive action, placing a phone call that would not only validate her daughter's tickets, but expose the bias and assumptions underlying Jennifer's treatment. The situation escalated in real time, the terminal transforming from a mundane transit space into a stage upon which larger societal dynamics played out: race, privilege, entitlement, power, and the consequences of unconscious bias all unfolding before the eyes of unsuspecting witnesses. Jennifer, still convinced of her authority, continued her scrutiny, unaware that her actions were being documented, her overreach destined to be exposed in ways that would reverberate far beyond the confines of Gate B12. Zara, maintaining composure beyond her years, waited quietly, her small hands clutching the elephant, her heart learning an early lesson about dignity, patience, and resilience. The injustice of the moment, the glaring contrast in treatment between her and the two white children moments before, highlighted the harsh reality of inequality and bias in everyday interactions, a lesson made all the more striking because it was being lived by someone too young to fully contextualize it, yet mature enough to endure it with grace. Victoria's call to the airline executive set into motion a chain reaction that would unmask Jennifer's prejudice, expose Vivian Ashworth's own pending arrival and misplaced outrage, and ensure that the narrative of injustice, bias, and eventual accountability would be recorded, discussed, and remembered by all who witnessed it. By the time Flight 447 was ready to board, the contrast between privilege and prejudice, between entitlement and innocence, had been made painfully clear to everyone present. Zara, despite the initial intimidation and scrutiny, had proven her composure and legitimacy, her mother's foresight ensuring that justice would prevail. Jennifer Walsh, meanwhile, would face consequences for her actions, her public and private accountability highlighting the stark difference between assumption and truth, bias and fact, entitlement and fairness. The episode, while occurring in a single terminal at O'Hare, encapsulated a broader narrative about race, privilege, and the microcosms of social hierarchy that operate in everyday life, a story that would ripple outward, documented on phones, shared across social media, dissected in conversations, and remembered as a powerful lesson on the consequences of prejudice. Zara Montgomery, 9 years old, had encountered one of the first moments of societal bias in her young life, faced it with poise, and emerged validated, her experience a testament to the power of preparation, parental guidance, and quiet resilience, while the adults around her, from Jennifer Walsh to Vivian Ashworth, were reminded that arrogance, entitlement, and prejudice carry consequences that even a child can trigger if justice and authority are exercised wisely. By the end of the day, the narrative of that terminal will become emblematic of a world in which inequality exists not just in laws or policies, but in small, seemingly mundane interactions, and yet where accountability, courage, and foresight can expose injustice, enforce fairness, and provide lessons that resonate far beyond the immediate actors involved, proving that even a 9-year-old traveling alone can wield a quiet, transformative power that exposes the truth and upends the assumptions of those who thought themselves untouchable.